This November, no matter the outcome, we will elect our 47th chief executive. But first, we're going to take a look back at how the presidents became president. This is your countdown to 47. We've now reached the phrase maker, Woodrow Wilson. Prior to becoming the 28th president, Wilson was a professor of politics at Princeton University. In 1902, Wilson became president of the university, where he stayed for the next 8 years. Members of the Democratic Party talked Wilson into running for governor of New Jersey in 1910, an election he won. 2 years later, Governor Wilson was nominated for president by the Democrats. After decades of dominance, a rift in the Republican Party provided Wilson the perfect circumstances for victory. With both President Taft and former President Roosevelt on the ballot, the vote was split, thus handing Wilson the election. Woodrow Wilson was now set to become the 28th President of the United States. President Wilson signed the Underwood-Simmons Act of 1913, which lowered tariffs and introduced a graduated federal income tax. He also pushed for the passage of the Federal Reserve Act and the Federal Trade Commission Act, establishing each of the agencies that still exist today. In 1914, war erupted in Europe. Many of the major powers quickly became involved, beginning what we now know as World War I. President Wilson almost immediately declared America's neutrality. In the subsequent years, German submarines sank multiple American ships, killing many on board. Most notable of these was in 1915 with the sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger ship traveling from New York City to England, resulting in the deaths of 128 Americans. Following this, the United States was drawn closer to the Allied side of the war. However, America officially remained neutral. President Wilson ran for re-election in 1916. Wilson's campaign touted the nation's neutrality and ran on the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." Wilson narrowly escaped defeat that November against Republican opponent Charles E. Hughes. On April 2nd, barely into his second term, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. They complied 2 days later, officially bringing the United States into the First World War. Soon after, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, which required all men between the ages of 21 and 30 to register for military duty. At war's end, 2.8 million men were drafted, more than 116,000 of which were killed, and more than 200,000 were wounded. In January of 1918, President Wilson introduced his 14 points for world peace, which were meant to be used in negotiations at the end of the war. However, after an Allied victory, the Treaty of Versailles brought an official end to World War I. But Wilson's 14 points were mostly disregarded. The treaty mainly focused on punishing Germany with financial reparations, disarming their military, and the coerced concession of massive amounts of territory. This built resentment among Germans, setting the stage for the Second World War decades later. The Treaty of Versailles also called for the creation of the League of Nations, a precursor to the United Nations that we have today. Wilson began a public speaking tour to gain support. While on this tour, he suffered multiple paralytic strokes, nearly killing him. President Wilson kept his strokes a secret and spent the remaining 2 years of his term incapacitated, aided in part in his presidential duties by his wife. Woodrow Wilson served as President of the United States from 1913 to 1921. I'm Eric George of Valley News Live, and this has been your countdown to 47.